One of the best parts of this TEDx event is the NC State student involvement in it, and I'm very excited to introduce Jeff Hubert. He's a senior in industrial engineering and economics. We actually even have a class together. Last spring, he spent 5 months living in Copenhagen and experiencing Danish culture. He also is the CEO of a web startup called Know It. So, thank you, Jeff.
So, the Danes and what we can learn from Denmark. Thomas Jefferson said that it is neither wealth nor splendor, but tranquility and occupation which give happiness. The same man who penned, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." I spent last spring living in Copenhagen for 5 months. It was one of the coldest winters on record in Denmark, as you can see. This is the saltwater inlet, I'll emphasize. I chose Denmark to spend time to reconnect with my heritage, something that I had really wanted to do for a very long time. Now, the Danes have gained a lot of positive attention over the last few years for the happiness that they have in their nation. But I don't want to glorify the Danes so much as use Denmark as a case study for what is core and common to us as humans. That being said, my perspective is very limited, and as is my time here today. So, little Denmark is a land of Vikings and open-faced sandwiches and pickled herring, which some people think tastes good. I am one of them. Lots of blondes, lots of bicycles, and of course, lots of beer. Recently, the OECD ranked Denmark as #1 in happiness. That's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Much to the Danes' amusement, honestly. What the media has reported about the Danes is that they have low expectations of life. And honestly, that's about as far as the media has dared to delve into it. But what strikes me as interesting is that it seems to me that man's end is happiness. We're all seeking happiness in our lives. And if happiness is so important to our lives, how little do we actually empirically study what works and what doesn't? I mean, why stop at, well, they have low expectations? I mean, that just does not inform our future lives at all. In Scandinavia, there is a long-standing historical social understanding. It's called a law, but it's not written on any books. It's called the Jante Law. Axel Sandemosa, a Swedish author, described Jante as, "This is Jante, each soul's little struggle for co-equality and recognition, never without consciousness that all the others are greater than he." Quite frankly, Jante Law praises mediocrity. It looks down on personal achievement and personal glory. It's very antithetical to the American sentiment. Now, many Danes will tell you that they believe that Jante Law is no longer relevant and is fading away. But in fact, they are quite wrong. It is still very much alive today, and while it may be being diluted by outside influence, it still lives. For instance, even the wealthiest Danes live in modest homes, drive modest cars, and never delve into the exceptional details of their vacations, but will simply gloss over and say, "I took a trip." The Danes believe, for good reason, that they are the pinnacle of society, although they'd likely never tell you that. The Danes work 35 hours a week. They get a full year of maternity leave. They have free healthcare, free education. They get 90% unemployment benefits for 2 years, excellent public transportation. They pay some of the highest taxes in the world, but they trust their government, a strange notion, and feel like they get what they pay for, another strange notion. Now, it's easy to say, well, of course the Danes are happy. I mean, look at them. They're beautiful, and they live in a beautiful country, and they have lots of money. But wealth is, in fact, a very poor estimator, I found, of happiness. In fact, the United States GDP per capita is $10,000 higher than Denmark, as ranked by the IMF and the World Bank. So it seems that you can't just stop at money. It's not at least the whole story. In Denmark, it seems that each person has a right to a certain level of income and opportunity. One Danish friend of mine related that she believed that if a homeless man took his government money, or woman, homeless person, took their government money and spent it on alcohol, that would be fine with her, because that's how this person got through the day. Again, a very strange sentiment. This attitude of fearing judgment, fearing giving judgment and fearing receiving judgment, and this attitude of praising mediocrity also extends into the workplace. 4% of Danes said they were interested in promotion in their employment. 68% said they were not in the least bit interested in promotion. What's interesting to me is how this low view of self is actually very good for society and very good for happiness. Now, we as Americans love to teach our children to have high self-esteems, and we get really scared when our teachers at school start giving our children low self-esteems. I mean, that would be the worst thing ever, right? But it seems like humility is actually quite a positive thing. People who have high self-esteems are quicker to judge other people. People who have high self-esteems are also faster to create constructs for which to separate society out so they can remain at the top. In that way, Jante and this low self-esteem seems to actually work quite well in Danish society. It is important to note just simply how antithetical this is to the American society, including very popular authors like Ayn Rand, who says, "Learn to value yourself, which means to fight for your happiness," or Elizabeth Gilbert, who says, "Happiness is a consequence of personal effort," or really, in reality, the entirety of the personal self-help section. So Danes are also noted for their dark humor and cynicism, which may at first seem rather morbid and definitely not anything that would be happy at all. But there's an interesting causality that comes about with low self-esteem and low expectations, where all of a sudden dark humor and low expectations, dark humor and cynicism become appropriate. In fact, dark humor and cynicism are often important factors for sheltering the self from adversity. You see, optimism in many ways is sticking your neck out and setting yourself up for failure. But dark humor and cynicism, you always maintain kind of a lowest common denominator of the world, and anything else good that happens is just gravy, and it's just wonderful. This sign is in the old Danish capital of Viborg in Jylland, which is the main peninsula of Denmark. And it reads, "The baker is dead, so he no longer bakes any bread." This is a statue called Survival of the Fattest. It's a little hard to see from here, but you have a white, obese woman from the first world holding a pair of scales. She's supposed to symbolize justice. And then you have this skinny third world man supporting her. She's quoted as saying, "I'm sitting on the back of a man. He is sinking under the burden. I would do anything to help him except stepping down from his back." Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, talks at length about the importance of this common social understanding of virtue to a culture. In fact, it seems to me that a culture must have this common social understanding that's both attainable as well as easily visualized. You see this in a very poignant way with the Danes, and it's sort of trivial, but if a Dane comes to a crosswalk at 3 a.m. in the morning, maybe they're walking home from the bar or whatever they're coming home from, they will stop and they will wait for the light to turn green. Regardless if there's a car in sight or anybody else to watch them, they'll stop and they'll wait. This extends also to healthcare. The Danes have free healthcare. So we as Americans, if we had free healthcare, right, we'd take as much as we could get every time we went to the doctor's office. But the Danes don't seem to do that. They seem very apt to take what they need and stop there. In many ways, as an economics major, this just baffles me, right? This is completely against all incentives, all the way that traditional models we understand how people work, or we say that we do. Dr. Louisa Corrado, who led a research study from Cambridge looking at happiness in Denmark, said, "The most important factors influencing happiness appear to be the quality of our social interaction with others and the confidence we have in our country's institutions." So it all kind of comes down to this. The Danes have these very clear social constructs that leads to happiness and security within their society. Their laws maximize the time they have, valuable time, with their family and friends. And their culture is based around inconspicuous consumption, consumption that's not obvious to other people or cannot be measured. This may be time with family and friends. This might be good food. This might be good beer. This might be a nice time in the park, like you saw slides here. This would never happen with my peers, but it does there. So the question is, how does this apply to the United States? Because the Danes are not necessarily separated from the world. They're not passionless. They're not simply stoicistic in their disposition. Rather, they seem to be able to mediate their appetites for materialism. So how does this apply to the United States? What is really the difference between the United States and Denmark? Why are they ostensibly happy and we are supposedly not? I believe the answer lies in a diversity of cultural morality. You see, Denmark has had an extremely homogeneous society for thousands of years. It is not far from the truth that most Danes are tall, white, and blonde. And just recently has Denmark started to face an influx of Eastern Europeans or other immigrants from other EU countries. And this has started to cause problems in their society because they're wondering, well, do we have to redefine what Danish means now? In the United States, we've dealt with this for a long time, right? The United States is the melting pot. This is what we do best. But when you take a standard of traditional values and you try to incorporate another society into that, you're inevitably going to meet in the middle, like you will with any negotiation. And when you smash society after society after society together, you dilute down and down and down until you can reach something that is measurable, something that makes sense, something that is reasonable. And so you come back to this science on the pedestal, science on the altar, and something that's measurable, which is money. Jonathan Haidt again quotes a child's handbook from the United States, which says, "My approach does not teach children what and what not to do and why, but rather it teaches them how to think so that they can decide for themselves what and what not to do and why." Now, while this all sounds well and good, Jonathan Haidt talks about how this is, in actuality, a case of reverse causality, and how we are trying to take the tail and wag the dog. So it seems that by handing over our standard of virtue to each individual, their own rationale, to interpret however they want within their own reason, in their own context, we also create a society of perfect subjectivism and subjectivity. This destroys all hopes at a common cultural understanding of virtue or success and lowers it down to the lowest common denominator that's measurable, which is money. This loss of language of virtue takes away all purpose or meaning or coherence that can be made outside of the context of values. And so we arrive at money, and we arrive at the hedonic treadmill. It's the idea that we can run and we can run and we can run and put all our effort into this pursuit, but eventually we'll end up right where we started in the same spot. So I'd like to ask the question, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to have American values? What is the American dream? I mean, is the American dream that if you work hard enough and you put enough elbow grease in, you can reach prosperity and be happy? Or is the American dream just an eloquent way of putting consumerism? Has the American dream done more to help us reach happiness? Or has the American dream done more to deepen the pockets of those who benefit from our materialism? George Carlin, a comedian, said, "It's called the American dream because you'd have to be asleep to believe it." Benjamin Franklin said, "Money never made a man happy yet, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more a man has, the more he wants. Instead of filling a vacuum, it makes one." It seems that individualism, this rugged individualism that Americans are famous for, has made America the superpower it is today. And likely, in fact, it has. I have benefited from this rugged individualism and ambition, and it has certainly done a lot for my past. In the 3rd grade, I loved my fleece jacket. It was my favorite object, and I wore it all the time. Coming back in from recess one day, the teacher asked me to take it off, and there was no good reason for that to be the case, so I simply told her no. That didn't go over so well. Obviously, I was kind of challenging her authority there, so she asked me again, and I told her no again. I then ended up finding myself in the principal's office, as you can imagine, and was there for most of the day. On the way back to class, the principal asked me if I understood why what I did was wrong. And I eked out a "not in my book," and found myself back once again in the principal's office. My mom was not happy. It's this subjectivity of virtue which I think has diluted our culture. So what I want to ask you, my peers, to do is to redefine what it means to be an American, to redefine what it means to find success in America. Is it money? Is it fame? Is it fortune? Is it any number of these things that find their place on the hedonic treadmill? Or will we define success as our character? Will we define success by the things that unify us, not by the things that separate us? Will we define success by money and fame and fortune, or by our character and by our capacity for love, and by a healthy dose of humility as well as pessimistic optimism? So maybe you aren't as awesome as you think. Maybe I'm not either. I'm not. Maybe our parents lied to us when they told us that you could do anything you wanted, the stars are yours. Maybe the American dream continues to lie and say it'll make you happy. Maybe you shouldn't take that pay raise and move to the other city. Maybe you shouldn't take that promotion and work longer hours. Maybe in relation to everybody else, we don't really deserve more than anybody else. Maybe by lowering our expectations on life, we can make ourselves just a little bit happy. It's a place to start. Thank you.